One. Mason Mount for Chelsea. Mount's super goal! That is a cracking goal!
The most unfairly judged player in English football, or a teacher's pet that is no longer protected by the faculty? Just how good is Mason Mount?
Of the attempt to sign him, he said no. That's Alonso, and that's...
Aside from this season, Mount has always been a reliable goal-getter from midfield. He's got excellent movement off the ball and a nose for getting into good goal-scoring positions. In terms of shooting technique, if you've seen his video with the F2 freestylers, you wouldn't be surprised he's got an incredibly efficient and well-rounded technique, finesse, lace across, volley, and he can find the right finishes when having to react to crosses or sharp layoffs inside the box. He's also a pretty good free kick taker, which begs the question, why is he not getting the same amount of goals as Lampard and Gerrard in their prime? Well, firstly, he doesn't shoot from distance as well as those guys. Can you imagine Mount trying to recreate that Gerrard FA Cup final? That amount of shot power is beyond him. Also, he doesn't have that same hunger and leading man energy those guys had. They were the faces of their clubs and they acted accordingly in games, constantly taking on the responsibility for securing the 3 points. Mount tends to fade into background more often and is happy to be a support act for club and country, tied down by defensive responsibilities. So he doesn't really fully unleash his goal-scoring potential. At the moment, he lacks that star quality or charisma to be banging in 20 goals plus a season.
Mount in towards Aubameyang.
Crossing forms a big part of Mount's game. He loves to drift into wide areas and put in crosses, whether it's cutbacks, in-swingers, or just whips to the far post. His accuracy rate is solid. It's close to De Bruyne, but would I rate it as high as De Bruyne based on the eye test? Not really. Mount has a tendency to hope and hit with his crosses, and it's frustrating because when he does focus on a particular target, he's brilliant at picking out players and he has such a unique way of striking across. It almost feels like he's hitting the valve on the ball and it has a prodigious dip. Now if we look at this clip here, it showcases how Mount's movement to get into these crossing areas is exceptional. He's got good perception, good timing of run, and it's quite deceptive too. And it reminds you of how Henderson and De Bruyne do it for Liverpool and City respectively. But once again, we can see that at times he rushes his crosses rather than focus on picking someone out.
Kovacic. Mount's done well.
In terms of Mount's ball carrying, he's often been negatively compared to the likes of Grealish, and you can see why. His precision in terms of ball carrying isn't in the same league. And he reminds me more of Gavi, where when the game gets tight and there isn't as much space to drive into, they can look rather average. In his defence, Mount is decent in tight spaces. He is agile and his feet are generally quick compared to the average Premier League player. But there's just a higher level of finesse which is slightly beyond his reach, and as a result he can't really use his dribbling to unlock the biggest games on a regular basis. He doesn't have that Musiala ability to power through a challenge, and thus he can't really impose his identity on the game via his ball carrying.
Well.
English midfielders tend to have exceptional long pass accuracy. It's just in the culture, wanting to ping a ball over a long distance. Mount has that in spades, but he also has the ability to control himself from resorting to a Hollywood ball. Now, in terms of his technique, he can ping off either foot, and it truly is a world-class attribute. He does at times force it, which can lead to transfers of possession, but generally you'd want to encourage him to try more long passes than less. And it's why if he was featured a little bit deeper, he could utilise it more. It'd be a weapon for his team and he'd have more space in which to hit the long passes into or even in behind. But as he tends to feature more of an inside forward, there's less chances to really utilise this skill.
That's partly the reasoning behind picking Jordan Ayew as your front man.
Mount is a trusted player in possession. He rarely loses the ball. But if there was a criticism we have, it's that he doesn't get on the ball an awful lot for an attacking midfielder, and thus he fails to stamp his authority on the game compared to a De Bruyne or Bruno Fernandes. It also makes it difficult to want to deploy him deeper in midfield because this tendency to want to be on the periphery isn't a trait that you want in a central midfielder. And again, it ties into this perception we have of Mount that he doesn't really want to be the star man or the maestro of the team in terms of the responsibility, but doesn't mind having the accolades that go with it.
Mason Mount, what a lovely ball. Reece James.
Mount's killer passing is underrated. Is it on the same level as an Odegaard? No, but it's incisive, it's effective, and in that inside left channel in particular, he generates a lot of assists. When he passes from right to left, he isn't as effective, but when he's opening up that body towards the right, when he's coming in from the left, he's very good at weighting the passes and assessing the situation in terms of whether the pass is going to be intercepted. He also has a sixth sense for when Reece James is making that run, and he's pretty good at feeding him in. We can't show that pass that he made to Havertz in the Champions League final, but that's a great example of how Mount's killer passing is underrated. He can definitely split defences, and it's something that I'd want to see more from him because he's definitely got the vision to execute that.
The area. Meanwhile, Chelsea breaking at the other end. Havertz trying to get in.
Plenty of blue making their way into the area.
One of the key reasons that Mount hasn't been trusted in deeper midfield areas is that he loses a lot of aerial duels. He competes in terms of making the jump, but there isn't really any meaning in his attempt to compete for the ball. It's almost for show, and he lacks the strength to muscle opponents off and affect their jump. So he rarely gets a clean, decisive header in loose ball, aerial duels in the midfield. Similarly, in terms of goal threat, he's not really going to win a lot of headers inside the box. So those late runs he makes, I guess that's a big reason why his goal tally isn't as big as a Gerrard or a Lampard, because his aerial ability is not as good as them. Not that they were aerial monsters, but he just doesn't really impact the penalty area with his heading.
Changing the angle of attack for Hudson-Odoi.
Robinson came off Mount.
Defensively, Mount is renowned for his work rate, and whilst he doesn't throw himself around in the unrestricted mould of a Gavi, he's a high-intensity presser and a very effective ball winner who succeeds in over 60% of his duels. This defensive quality he brings is highly valued in modern high-press systems, and you can see why he's often utilised in the final third rather than as a pure midfielder due to the anxiety he can induce in the opposition's backline. Could he play in a two-man midfield or as a pure central midfielder? He seems intelligent enough tactically to perhaps be able to pull it off, although it's worth noting that he's a very front foot forward type of defensive player, which is slightly a different proposition to how a centre mid would generally hold their position and only press when certain triggers present themselves.
Mount.
Tactically under Tuchel, Mount featured as an inside forward in a front three in a 3-4-3, and his versatility in that role allowed Chelsea to either go into a 5-4-1 shape off the ball or a 5-3-2 off the ball if they wanted to clog up the midfield. And in possession, it allowed them to adopt a 3-2-5 formation, with Mount and Havertz inside the half space areas providing an inverted threat, whilst the wing-backs provided the wide threat. Now, under Potter, it was less clear what role there was for Mount, and especially with all the signings coming in, Potter flitted from formation to formation, and Mount became a lost soul with no sense of direction. With Lampard's return, will that spark a resurgence in Mount's career at Chelsea? Will he become a fixture in the side again? I don't really see him as a good fit for Chelsea's ideal lineup, considering the players they now have in their roster. Chelsea's ideal lineup is still a 3-4-3, but he doesn't fit into the best version of this 3-4-3 considering the current squad. Now, he could reprise his role that he had under Tuchel, but in my opinion, that role that he had under Tuchel worked for a bit in the Champions League, but it was quite limited in terms of their league campaign. It got too predictable, and Mount doesn't offer enough goals in that role for it to be a viable option. If Chelsea went 3-5-2, that could be a better option for Mount as part of a midfield three, but none of Chelsea's forwards currently suit a two-man partnership. 4-3-3 doesn't really suit Chelsea's fullbacks. A lot of Chelsea's players would be out of position in order to get Mount into his best position. Bearing that in mind, his face just doesn't simply fit with his new teammates. Now, in terms of the best clubs for Mount to join, the easiest fit would probably be a Liverpool. He's the type of personality-free midfielder who thrives under Klopp, and he'd be a pressing machine, he'd chip in with goals, and he'd be happy to be at the service of others. So for me, Liverpool is a standout team for him to join. Another option could be Newcastle. I think they're a team that's quite versatile in the way that they play. They've got that three-man midfield where the box-to-boxers love to go back and forth, and I feel like Mount could be an option there, be an upgrade on Willock, or at least compete with Willock, and similarly with Joe Linton, it would give them more depth in terms of their midfield options. In conclusion, Mount is a player who is a pragmatic manager's dream because you can use him to plug gaps, he can be an asset on the counter-attack, and he follows instructions to a T. As a consequence, he often gets favoured in selection over the likes of fan favourites like Grealish for England, and that in turn leads to an underrating, underappreciation of what attributes he does bring to the table due to his perception as a negative option. At his best, in many ways, he could be English football's answer to a Valverde in some respects, in that he's able to be used in bespoke tactical schemes. For him to secure world-class status, he really needs to improve his impact in the big games on a consistent basis. He had a miraculous 21 season in that Champions League run, but he's had a huge drop-off since, and perhaps a move away from Chelsea to a side where he can rediscover his mojo and display a bit more of a leading man energy that could really earn him a greater reputation than the one that's currently bestowed upon him. Anyway guys, hope you enjoyed the video. Please like, share and subscribe, and see you guys again next time. Bye.
Spare for Guardiola, joy for Marie.